I'm going to read from a paper. I hope you'll all excuse me, but wow, what a day. I'm with Paul, my head's popping with it all. So I'm really glad I've got this written down because I keep going off on sidetracks all the time. So I will try to stay focused and stay within my time. Okay. Every time I come to edit this paper, I find I have a lot of new things to say, and it just keeps morphing. It is probably because this element of my professional life has been an important explored and unexploded field of conflict for me. And I want to begin by thanking the organizers for setting this up. The metaphor of conflict, struggle, and fight keeps recurring. It is exactly the opposite of the dreaming spires and ivory towers, which conjure up peace, concord, and calm, a tranquil place to think. So write your bookers then is fighting talk. This isn't the way it should be. Through this conference, I hope to find like-minded individuals who also want to adjust higher education so it is a better fit for the demands of today. We need a higher education system which will take us into tomorrow, not back to yesterday. We need a higher education system which will promote the breaking down of barriers to learning. We need a higher education system which will show us how to recognize and remove all kinds of bias. As working class academics, I feel we are uniquely placed to find ways of opening up academia to its natural constituency. To any adult who is curious and wants to learn, I am not talking about children and schooling here. We must all be literate. I'm talking about any adult who wants to learn, no matter who they are or how much money they have. And of course, no matter at what stage in life they find themselves. The wonderful poet Tony Harrison has been an inspiration to me throughout my journey in academia and consequently for this paper. This paper will focus on my own discipline of English literature, helping me to cut out a lot of the other sidetracks I keep wandering down, and they've increased from today's papers. Harrison got me started one day long ago in 1984. I heard him reading one of his sonnets on TV. From the kitchen, I heard this northern voice reading poetry like I'd never heard before. I stepped into the living room, tea towel in hand, gobsmacked by what I was hearing. It was Bookends, a sonnet which speaks about the death of his mother. Beneath that was also a lament for how his learning had alienated him from his family and his working class roots. Hearing him, I began to think how much I'd always liked poetry. We had none in the house. So I went out and bought the Oxford Anthology. That's a copy of it on my slide. My journey had begun. The alienation we working class academics face, as Harrison recognizes, is twofold. We do not fit into academia, and we've heard some very eloquent testimony to that today. It's not what we were born into. But also, we no longer fit in our families or our own social circle. My oldest friends, the working class ones, do not fully understand what I do now. The middle class ones do. This is the complex journey I encourage my students to embark upon. I always warn them that it won't be easy, but hell, it will be worth it. Throughout my academic career, I've worked with students of all ages and classes. Actually, despite its problematic history, English literature is a provocative yet leveling subject. The desire to learn about it has nothing to do with class, I find. The journey my students take is not about career enhancement, although that does often feature in the mix of motivations. It is about becoming who you were meant to be, finding me through exploration of the arts. The title of this paper comes from Harrison's poem, Them and Us. In it, he deals with received pronunciation and how his working class accent singled him out at grammar school. He also demands we reclaim the traditional texts of English literature for the radical political statements many of them are. I'm now going to wrestle with technology again and I hope it works.
Them and Us, for Professors Richard Hoggart and Leon Cortez. Aye, 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 stutterer Demosthenes, gob full of pebbles, out-shouting seas. 4 words only of, me heart aches and mine's broken, you barbarian, T.W. He was nicely spoken. Can't have our glorious heritage done to death. I played the drunken porter in Macbeth. Poetry is the speech of kings. You're one of those. Shakespeare gives the comic bits to prose. All poetry, even Cockney Keats, you see, has been dubbed by us into RP. Received pronunciation. Please believe us. Your speech is in the hands of the receivers. We say us, not us. T.W. That shut my trap. I doff my flat A's, as in flat cap, my mouth all stuffed with glottals, great lumps to hawk up and spit out. Enunciate! So, right, you buggers then, we'll occupy your lousy, leasehold poetry. I chewed up literature and spat the bones into the lap of dozing Daniel Jones, dropped the initials I'd been harried as, and used my name and own voice. Us, 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 ended sentences with by, with, from, and spoke the language that I spoke at home. R.I.P., R.P., R.I.P. T.W. I'm Tony Harrison, no longer you. You can tell the receivers where to go and not aspirate it. Once you know Wordsworth's matter, watter are full rhymes. Us can be loving as well as funny. My first mention in the Times automatically made Tony Anthony.
This pair of 16-line sonnets speaks of how Harrison felt alienated from his roots by his experience of grammar school. It also speaks of how grammar school threatened to destroy his own truth by seeking to make him what he was not. If nothing else, a poet needs to speak their own truth from the heart. Harrison's conflicted position highlights how there persists in our culture ideological beliefs that you cannot be a poet who is taken seriously, you cannot be cultured and creative, you cannot be an educated person if you do not fit neatly into an established set of criteria. These cultural pressures ensure that academics and creatives from working class backgrounds have to shout very loud from the fringes of a system that increasingly regards us as irrelevant. Here we see in action DBC Pierre's governing ideologies, mentioned in Release the Bats. In 2016, just before the days of President Trump, he writes, I stumbled across the quantum place where yes meant no, where black was white, where losing an election made you president. The more I examined the space between the real and what we construe as real, the more it felt like a key to our central dilemma. This central dilemma is what infects English universities, where they should be places that nurture radical thinking and ways of promoting equality. They have become engines of commerce, excluding those of us who have no money. Of course, Harrison is a stunningly successful poet, but the power of the governing ideologies in the arts means working class artists and those of us who teach in the arts still have a huge fight on our hands. We are ambitious of helping the majority of the working class people to claim a space here, but the system constantly conspires against us, even as it claims to be our champion. Our culture has a very complex relationship with poetry. Popular perception of it is fueled by a toxic mix of boredom at school, greetings cards, doggerel, and all aspects of innate elitism fueled by prejudice. I think there is also something of fear in there too, of being made to look stupid, or even worse if you're working class, a snob. Our culture does not want ordinary people to know how radical poetry can be, and Charlotte showed us this morning a good demonstration of how it can be. Universities have traditionally been the prime mechanism of social exclusion and exclusivity, teaching Greek and Latin to the privileged so they could identify each other and exclude those who did not belong. This particularly keen in my case, working as I do in that bastion of the proof of the superiority of English language and its culture. English took over from the classics in the days of empire as Britain exported its culture across the world. Imperial Britain claimed that the English language and its accomplished writers offered tangible proof that English language and its culture trumped all others. This provided justification for the colonization of peoples and the denigration of their cultures. There are equally corrupt social motivations for the rise of the subject at home, where English literature was used to paper over the cracks left by the shaking of Christian certitude in the 19th century. I do not hold this against my subject, however. Like Harrison, I see its potential to unify and advance our society for everyone who lives in it. I am an unlikely lecturer in English. I failed my 11 plus and couldn't wait to escape school. It wasn't the right place for me, confused as I was. Like many other girls growing up in the perplexing patriarchy of the 1950s, I was taught it was dangerous to say, I want. I want, don't get, was a favorite phrase. As a consequence, I only learned to reject what I did not want. A bit like the heroines of Jane Austen, whose only power is that of refusal. I was given no tools with which to plan a future, except that I had to keep myself pure until I met the right man and settled down. Even at 11, though, I knew enough to know I did not want the Catholic convent grammar school with which I was threatened. So I happily went to the bright new secondary modern with most of my friends and left as soon as I could. I realized my parents' dream by working in an office and started to have fun in a haphazard way. I look back sometimes and I think I should have been at university, but there was no way that was ever going to happen for me then. I didn't even know there was one down the road in Manchester. It was the 1960s though, and lots of young people like me were asking questions. I wanted to be chasing the Rolling Stones. As it turns out, I was right to do that at the time. I have some wonderful memories and sold my letters from them to help fund the final year of my PhD in the 90s. In the 1980s, I'd reached some sort of maturity after the death of my parents and the birth of my children. I took a radical new access course with Adult Education Department in Southampton and discovered that nuts like me populated art departments in universities. As an undergraduate, I remember walking through the swing doors into the English department and thinking, behind each of the doors down this corridor sits someone who gets me. It was a homecoming. So I don't really share all that academic alienation we've been hearing a lot of. It's kind of on one level, on other multiple levels. Yes, I do. I started my career as a lecturer, becoming a young academic at the age of 45. Right now, I regard myself as being mid-career. However, because of the intersection of a trio of inhibitors, class, gender, and age, most people, and I include my colleagues here, don't understand this at all. During my academic career, I've been lucky enough to follow my heart and my passion for poetry. I have worked in the arts first at Southampton, currently at the University of Winchester and the OU. Often I feel like Dr. Johnson's famous dancing dog. Sir, a woman's preaching is like a dog's walking on its hind legs. It is not done well, but you are surprised to find it done at all. For woman, read elderly working class woman, and for preaching, read giving a lecture. And that pretty much sums up what I've been dealing with for 30 years. From the same Enlightenment appeal for harmony and balance, Dr. Johnson saw weaknesses in the metaphysical poetry of John Donne. Writing about Donne's use of imagery, Johnson famously said that it yoked together heterogeneous ideas by violence. This kind of uncomfortable misfit also sums up what has dogged my academic career. I have never fitted the image. Even those who know me well and all about what I do often have difficulty believing that I actually lecture and give papers at academic institutions. A member of my family asked about it. There must be some mistake. You know, everyone calls themselves lecturers now. You can have lecturers in hairdressing or plumbing or bricklaying. You must be just one of those who calls themselves a lecturer. The many contradictions in my life contribute to why I like the yoking together of the two cultural concepts of working class and academia. Contradictions can be creative as well as complex. John Donne was right to revel in paradox. My relationship with what has happened in universities over the last 20 years has not been a happy one, mostly because my ideas of what we should be doing in university never did fit with what has become mainstream thinking. I have found a way through being an hourly paid lecturer on 0 hours contracts, sharing the texts that I love with my students, and generally being able to continue dissenting within the machine. This is becoming increasingly difficult. Out here on the margins, meaningful discussion and the innovation needed to fulfill the social mission a university should be fulfilling are stifled. And absolutely, universities do not fulfill the missions to which they pay lip service on their websites. It was frustration at this hypocrisy that sent me one day to the internet, where I put in working class academics as a search, hoping there might be others out there who understood. And there are, here we are, it's great. It is to the liberal arts and to socialist initiatives that I owe everything I am, from the free orange juice when I was a child of the welfare state, to the open access finally to higher education when I was ready for it. The open access to higher education is another door I heard slammed shut just after I passed through it. Our country needs to nurture ability in every field if we are to flourish as a country. We have a steep hill to climb. As Tony Harrison points out so eloquently, this system wasn't perfect 60 years ago. It's got a lot worse since. I am ashamed of my generation who have facilitated this decline. I'm looking for a new set of nuts with whom I can unite to exert some influence on higher education. I would like to work on ways we might address the scandal of what has become known as a generation of lost learners. There are many people out there who, just as I was, are beginning to find themselves and want to explore further, but they cannot afford to access the learning experience they crave. I hope I am not being naive to think we could reclaim higher education and open it up for everyone. Thank you so much for listening this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much, Eileen. I'm with, in the comment section is very active here, lots of appreciation. I'm with Darren Flynn, who's writing about your presentation and saying that you have a beautiful and expressive turn of phrase in which to communicate some very powerful ideas.
Thank you, Darren.
So, yeah, really interesting stuff there. If I can just put a question to you myself, I'll come back to the comments that are appearing in the chat in a moment. But you're describing in both your abstract and in the references that you made in the paper itself, you're describing processes where certain approaches to education are normalized. The kind of monetization of education and the preparation of people for careers, institutions that reflect certain kind of managerial structures. But I'm interested in the connection that you make between that and the kind of class language that you use when you're making reference to Harrison there. So here's my question: if what is taught is dictated by economic value, if the very language that we might use to describe educational value is determined by the business models that you speak about, people in the comments were writing about the kind of McDonaldization, if you like, of education. Then how can we reinforce this non-monetary value of education? Or maybe a fairer question is to ask how you might do this in your own teaching. How do we present some kind of alternative vision?
Well, everybody knows there's no money in poetry for a start. So anybody who comes to study English literature is probably, if they do have career aspirations, and of course, as working class people, and we've heard this all day, we always feel like we have to justify ourselves economically for being self-indulgent and doing things that we love. You know, it was a revelation to me that sitting down to read a book was perceived by my middle-class lecturers to be work. You know, the whole thing around what I do is fraught with the kind of values that I was instilled with when I was growing up. So a lot of people who come to English literature do it out of love, and they're surprised to find that, for instance, you can become a lawyer, you can manage a hospital, you can do all kinds of things if you have a degree in English literature. But actually what I want to try to do, because I'm the cheapest part of the degrees that I teach, I'm very cheap, I could offer a degree in English literature for about a fifth or a quarter of what people have to pay at the moment. And what I'm hoping to do through contact with like-minded individuals is find some way that we can award degrees, award people's, a bit like the Open University used to be, and let people do what they love as well, but for less money. The module I teach with the Open University now costs £3,096, one module. Used to cost about 700. And I thought, I think I could still deliver a module for 700 without all that kind of top heavy stuff. So I see the arts being nudged out by the issues you just raised, Paul. And I fear that if it continues that way, arts degrees are going to get more and more expensive, I think, and really be the preserve of people with money rather than people who love them.
Thank you very much, Eileen. That was a very explicit answer to the question. I wasn't expecting something quite so practical. So here, you heard it here first, folks. The Working Class Academics Conference, soon to become the Working Class University.
Yes.
Let's see how that pans out. Okay. I'm just going to ask one more question, Eileen, before we need to move on to Vasilisa's presentation. But Claire Moon, writing in the comments, is talking about a kind of non-place, a kind of void space that happens when you leave the working class or become a kind of representative of a working class person within an academic institution. Is this something that you experience yourself then, this sort of feeling of never quite belonging?
Oh, never quite belonging, definitely. Frequently, as an hourly paid lecturer, I sit in a meeting with about 20 other people, and I'm not being paid. I'm the only one in the room not being paid.
Right.
I think the misfit that I'm talking about is I'm usually ignored. I'm not useful. No one networks with me. I don't have connections, you know. So it's invisibility, really.
Yeah. Well, it's
I've
kind of,
now, you're right.
Yeah, you have now. So just finally, it's really more of a comment, I suppose, in terms of connecting the paper that you delivered to some of the ideas about self-representation that we were speaking about in the previous stream. But it seems to me that maybe the thing that you've mentioned and spoke about very powerfully, the difference between the reality of your experience and the way that the world is represented to us.
Yes.
I guess my feeling about that is that the only way we overcome that is perhaps through some kind of self-representation, as you know, which was very clearly elaborated on, I think, in the previous stream.
I agree.
Good to hear.
It's very difficult to wrestle it to the ground because it's so nebulous and it claims to be what it's not, you know, the widening participation, the equality and diversity and la la la, whilst it just carries on getting more and more elitist or charging ordinary people 50 grand to join. No, we're not going to do that, are we?
We're not, hopefully not. Thank you very much, Eileen.
Okay.
That was great. Great to kick off this final stream. As has already been commented on, beautifully put, beautiful expressive turn of phrase there. So next,